I recently discovered a song by Michelle Williams entitled Free. It starts like this. I heard a story somebody told me of 3 different women long ago. One wasn't worthy, one was just thirsty, and one had tried everything to stop all the hurting. Then they met a man who would hold the key to erase the past and change everything. Freed by his glory, 3 different stories. When he speaks a word, the chains are broken, and she who the Son sets free is free indeed. It's a beautiful song about redemption, about different women all redeemed by the same man, all redeemed by Jesus. We hear about the redemption that Jesus offers us in 1 Peter. The Apostle Peter writes this letter to a group of believers living in the days before one of the greatest persecutions of Christians in the history of the world. It is a letter written most likely while Peter sits in a jail cell right before he gives his life for refusing to deny Christ, something he had originally been so quick to do. Peter is writing to encourage Christians to stand firm. Some of them will likely die in days to come. They will most certainly suffer. It will be tempting in a way they may have never been tempted before, to simply deny their newfound faith and return to the way of life they previously lived. But the letter begins with a message of praise and hope. Praise to God for their living hope in Jesus. Our passage today follows that opening passage about praising God for having hope. Because of that hope, Peter calls for those who hear his letter to be holy, to live like people who have encountered God and been forever changed. With language that implies that each passage is building upon the previous thought, Peter carries us through to what is now the 17th verse of the first chapter, which reads, "Since you call on a Father who judges each man's work impartially, live your lives as strangers here in reverent fear," or in other words, with respect and awe of God. The letter continues, "For you know that it was not with perishable things such as silver and gold that you were redeemed from the empty ways of life handed down to you from your forefathers, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. He was chosen before the creation of the world, but was revealed in these last times for your sake. Through him you believe in God who raised him from the dead and glorified him, and so your faith and hope are in God." Here in verses 18 and 19, Peter makes a short but powerful statement that we are redeemed from the empty way of life handed down to us from our forefathers, that we are redeemed from the empty culture handed down to us through the generations by what is infinitely more precious than silver or gold. Notice I said we, not just they. You see, Peter was writing to a specific audience, to Christ followers spread throughout the land, a diaspora of believers. His words written to Christ followers still have meaning for us today because they offer hope for us, for everybody. The how of our redemption is not what I want to look at today, but what it means that we have been redeemed. We're going to look at some good news a little bit later, but before we get there, I've got some bad news. The bad news is that we have been given an empty way of life. Peter says on over in what we know as the 4th chapter that empty life for Peter's audience sounded like people living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. Still sounds familiar today, doesn't it? Hardee's can't even sell their cheeseburgers without sexy models on their ads. People living life solely for pleasure, chasing constant sex, drug, and idols. Our culture tells us to do just that. Our culture throws in a hunt for power and prestige with a little mix of selfishness as well. And we all fall prey to that pressure. Unwittingly, unknowingly, unconsciously, we fall prey to the idols in our world. Our idols may be different, driving fast cars and wearing flashy clothes splashed across our television screens and our mobile devices, tweeting about their fancy lives and taking over our conversations. Our carousing sounds more lively with high-def speakers, and surround sound, our chasing after sensual pleasures, involves less chasing and more sitting as it is brought right to us without any effort on our part. It may look different on the surface, but the fact remains we too have been handed down an empty way of life by those who came before us. We've been handed a culture that promotes celebrity over compassion, purchases over people, and pleasure over responsibility. We have inherited emptiness. The result of that emptiness is that we have been given a world where people can sit in their fancy living rooms and watch on their big screen TVs in horror as a city of people burn, where people can sit idly by as dogs and rubber bullets and water cannons are used on peaceful protesters, where politics destroys family relationships and communities, where the fact that the news is bad is not surprising. In fact, it's expected. The result is a world that spreads tragic news story after tragic news story, and then funny cat videos back to back like wildfire via social media, as if the two should impact us in the same way. And we have inherited a world where often they do. That cute video of the baby laughing that causes that joy to surge up within us gets just as much thought, attention, and reaction as the image of the traumatized little boy sitting in the ambulance after tragedy has struck. The result is that people spend hours sitting on the couch watching television or playing video games, apathetically trying to kill the hours of their lives, make them disappear quickly, filling them with something that gives them some sort of pleasure. People spend countless hours following their social media favorites but can't look up from their screens long enough to memorize the faces of the people they see every day or make it through a meal with family and friends. The news is bad. Over 42,000 people commit suicide in the United States every year. That's 100 people a day. And while certainly a number of those can be accounted for by mental illness and other distinct factors, could it be that a portion of that number are the terrible and tragic end result of an empty life that sees no hope and no meaning and no purpose? Research tells us that nearly 10% of the population, 1 in 10 people aged 12 and over, have used an illicit drug in the past month. And that number is increasing instead of decreasing. People are searching for something to fill the void in their lives because their lives are empty. Think of the stories you've heard of senseless violence, excuses that make no sense when people are acting out. A toddler killed because a man was outraged at a perceived traffic slight. People are reactionary and apathetic because they have an emptiness inside that denies life's meaning. An emptiness resulting in bad news. We've probably all felt it at some point, all been to that place where we're just trudging through the day, working our 9 to 5, killing time until it is time to go to bed so we can get up and do it all over again, searching for something to give us a momentary sense of emotion, something to make us feel angry or happy or sad or peaceful before we slip back into the numbness. We've probably all had those days where life just seems empty, or maybe we're just too apathetic to care. And into that empty place, that depressed place, that drug-addicted haze, that alcoholic buzz, that suicidal pain, Peter writes the good news. We have hope. Redemption is the freeing of someone from bounds placed upon them by forces beyond their control, by a Redeemer who was willing to pay the cost. There is a cost to set us free, a cost that we alone cannot pay. Not only is our freedom costly, the price for it is precious and steep. Jesus pays that price. Jesus is our Redeemer. Jesus joins humanity, takes on flesh, walks among the created beings of this earth, and lives a life of purpose. Jesus' ministry is full of examples of him redeeming people. Every time he heals someone, every time he forgives someone, every time he includes someone that has been outcast, he pays an ever-increasing price to set them free from the things that bind them. He pays an ever-increasing price to free them from their demons, from their physical bondage, from their societal imprisonments. At first, it is the price of anonymity. He gives up his life as a common carpenter, a son of Mary and Joseph, a life of normalcy, of being the boy next door. Then as word of him spread, he gives up his privacy, his home, his stable life. He gives up the approval of the townsfolk who had probably baked him goodies for his birthday and watched him grow. They become so appalled with his words that they run him out of town and try to toss him off a cliff. He gives up the chance to just sit back and relax, telling stories of what had been with the people who could remember his first steps, who could remember his days of teething and toddling. The price becomes steeper as he gives up the respect of the leaders and people of the religious community. He gives up the right to end a friendship with the person he knows will betray him. He gives up the right to end relationships with people he knows will deny him. During Jesus' ministry, he gives up everything we seem to hold dear: home, family, community, familiarity, stability, the right to choose with whom we spend our time, the right to stay within our comfort zones. Losing those things was the price paid to redeem, to set free from physical captivity, social isolation, and pain and suffering of every kind, people that often didn't even bother to thank him. But Jesus knows that still is not enough. Giving up those simple human comforts is not enough because it will cost much more to redeem the world. So Jesus continues his work, his mission, knowing, as Peter's letter tells us, that he has been chosen before the creation of the world, that ultimately he must give his life to redeem. Here's that text again. For you know that it was not with perishable things, such as silver and gold, that you were redeemed, but with the precious blood of Christ, a lamb without blemish or defect. He was chosen before the creation of the world. Christ paid the price to redeem us, each and every one, to set us free from the empty way of life we are given. The good news is that we have been redeemed by that which is more precious than gold and silver. We have been redeemed by that which was ordained before the creation of the world. We have been redeemed by the blood of the spotless Lamb of the risen Lord. We've been redeemed by the radical teachings and life of a man out of Nazareth, a man who gave up home and family and community and respect and stability and love of neighbor and friend to heal broken bodies, to lift up the outcast, to free people from their demons. We've been redeemed from the emptiness. We have been set free. Child of God, let me remind you that no longer does the emptiness of life, the drudgery of the day, the fleeting pleasure and satisfaction of worldly things hold sway over you. You have been redeemed from that emptiness. You have been redeemed that you might have faith and hope in God. You have been redeemed from an empty life to a life full of the Lord, a life full of meaning and direction. Peter tells us in verse 22 that we are redeemed to purify ourselves by obeying the truth so that, this is important, so that we have sincere love for our brothers and sisters. This is why we've been redeemed, so that we love one another deeply, deeply from the heart. We are a chosen people, a people belonging to God, a people called out of darkness into light. So as a people united, standing together, we can live now with meaning and direction. New Testament scholar T.W. Manson reminds us that Christ has two hands, one that points the way and one that helps us along. So with the knowledge that you have been shown what it means to be redeemed, to live a life of love, truth, hope, and purpose, with the assurance that Christ will help you along, do not give in to the empty life you have been given. Do not despair at the bad news. Do not let the emptiness of this life that surrounds you keep you from continually seeking God. Do not let the pain and the sorrow, the drudgery and the baseness of humanity keep you from being a light to the world around you. For you were redeemed from that empty life, set free from those chains that bound you and kept you powerless. If you are thirsty, remember, you have been given rivers of living water. If you feel you are not worthy, remember that no one else can cast the first stone, and Jesus has paid whatever price was due for your sins. If you are hurting, remember that he is the healer of all pain and every suffering. Like the women in the song, you have met a man who holds the key to erase the past and change everything. Freed by his glory, all different stories. When he speaks a word, the chains are broken, and whomever the Son sets free is free indeed. Free to live a life redeemed, free to live a life of love. So live today and every day like you have been redeemed to love one another deeply from the heart. Thanks be to God.